Anyhow, I joined the Navy in January 1963, and I went to boot camp in San Diego, and I got into the Air Corps of the Navy, Naval Air Corps. And my first duty station for 3 years, believe it or not, was Iwakuni, Japan. And I really had a great time over there. I fell for a Japanese girl, and one thing led to another. And but I had a high clearance in the service. I can remember my mother writing me. She thought I became a communist. I think the FBI came to her house. They were getting me a top secret in clearance because I was working with high clearance stuff. In those days, it was fail-safe was the situation because of our scenario during the Cuban Missile Crisis when Kennedy was president. And so I had to work with this device that I had to set every day, and you had to have a high clearance, and the pilots would get this device, and we went to war with Russia. The plane would just go right to its target. This was called a fail-safe scenario. And so I was responsible for that. So I didn't really want to screw up really bad there. But after my tour in Japan, I came back to the States, and I got reassigned to NAS Moffett Field, California, and with a P3 squadron. I was an aviation ordnanceman in those days, and P3s were a ASW aircraft. You know, they actually were sub-hunters in those days. And the Vietnam War at the time was starting to escalate and get kind of out of hand, and we were sending more and more troops over there. And so we had deployments. We'd go into Sangley Point in the Philippines, and from there we'd have detachments into Camaron Bay. And I was in Vietnam in 1969 and 1970, and our job is we used to fly sorties up and down the South Vietnamese coast, and our main job was to prevent enemy trawlers, Viet Cong trawlers and North Vietnamese trawlers, from bringing weapons into South Vietnam. And the only actual action I ever had, we'd take occasionally ground fire because we'd only fly about 1,000 feet off the coast in the air. And I remember one time you could hear them on the plane because the plane was metal, and you could hear them tick, 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 tick. And I remember one going, I felt a shell go right by my ear, scared the living hell out of me. But I made it through the Vietnam thing, and I eventually got discharged in 1971, so I spent about 8 years in the service. And it was tough. It was really hard in those days because there was so much of our country that was against that war. And what a lot of people I don't think realized was that we belonged to SEATO. SEATO is Southeast Atlantic Treaty Organizations, and when one country's invaded, the way it works, it's like NATO in Europe, is when one country's, the other ones have to get involved to protect it. You know, like Korea was supposedly a police action. Korea was a similar situation, which involved SEATO again. So, but the problem was coming back to this country, we weren't kind of welcomed like World War II veterans and Korean veterans and everything else. So it was really hard. It wasn't as bad on me as, some of these guys that really saw a lot of action. I didn't see that kind of action that some of these poor guys had to go through, and a lot of them died, 50,000 of them, I think, So it was pretty tough to adjust when you got back to this country. Anyhow, when I got discharged at Moffett, and me and a couple of my buddies started heading back towards Chicago. These two guys were from Ohio, and we stopped in Reno, and I fell in love with Reno, Nevada. And I remember going into a personnel, in those days they were called personnel offices, now they're called human resources, and with my "don't forget to hire the vet" sign, so it was pretty. Anyhow, I started out as a bar back and got into the food and beverage industry, and 40 years later, I finally retired from it. It was something. It was quite an experience. Some of the highlights of my life was quitting smoking. I really was proud of myself there. I did indulge a little bit in the other paraphernalia, but not very long. Couldn't afford it. And I have a brother, a younger brother, who was born in 1958. And I don't know whether he was planned, though, but he's a good guy. And My relationship with my sister and brother now is very close, you know, which I think, you know, if anybody's watching this 100 years from now, family is so important now. I think it's more important than it was 40 or 50, 60 years ago, you know, because it's a thing that should be really tight-knit, you know, and I think the world of my siblings, you know, Jill and Brett. I love them. And long after I'm gone, I hope somebody might watch this. You know, I have some wonderful nephews and nieces that I care a lot about. I've got some grandnieces now, you know, and I just turned 68 today, so June 21st. So I'm going to stop right now, I think.